My name is Jason S. Fung, the host of Vanilla Club Podcast. Today's episode is with Gabrielle Feather. Gabrielle is known as Holding Both on Substack and describes her page as a space for the in-between, grief and awe, collapse and becoming, motherhood and undoing, hope and rage. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Tasmania, working in the field of psychology, and specifically climate and collapse-aware psychology. I came across Gabrielle's writing on Substack and was captured by her ability to address some really heavy topics and do so in a very direct way, but also in a way that was, let's say, poetic. As Gabrielle points out, the name Holding Both is an acknowledgement that there are plenty of contradictions, though, in navigating a world in polycrisis. In this episode, we talk about being the bridging generation between the old world and the new. We speak about how collapse is a process, not a singular event. Gabrielle walks us through her own healing journey, which begins as a young activist at the Wilderness Society. She speaks of struggling to find her life purpose in a system that she didn't believe in, and finding disillusionment at every turn, to then leaning into the disillusionment and finding joy on the other side of it. Gabrielle also tells us about an experience she had with ayahuasca, where the plant told her that emotional regulation is the number one thing that humanity needs to cultivate. I'd like to acknowledge First Australians and recognize their continuous connection to country, community, and culture. We hope you enjoy. Gabrielle, thank you so much for coming on with us today. You know, when we talk about acknowledging Indigenous voices and we talk about Indigenous stewardship, something that you talk a lot about, I couldn't think of a finer person to engage on some of these subjects with and dig into some of your content that you so eloquently write about in Holding Both. A lovely Substack that I think covers so many highly relevant topics. I think it's sort of the resilience, you know, you talk about digital resilience, you talk about a lot of post-growth psychology, a very highly relevant and timely conversation to have. So with that, thanks for coming on.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So maybe we could just start with a quotation of yours from the article is called Mapping Collapse and Its Alternatives. You know, you talk about, I think my Dharma is about building the conditions in which others don't have to self-optimize to feel worthy. I was wondering if maybe we could just start with that, and because I think it gives a bit of a snapshot about who you are and where you're coming from.
That's a big topic, a big place to start. When I think about what I mean by self-optimize, in that moment I was thinking about the sort of the personal brand movement. I was thinking about myself and the struggles I've had personally to make money, primarily, if I'm honest, as a person, as an adult who has been what I now call collapse aware. That particular phrase has only joined my lexicon more recently, but I have been collapse aware for about 20 years. So since I left school. And that has meant that I've really struggled to find purpose, find meaning, commit to something, because it all felt so meaningless. It all felt like it was in service of a system that I didn't believe in, a system that I could see was hurting people everywhere. And this most latest movement towards this kind of personal brand way of making money, it feels like freedom, to many people, I'm sure, and it also feels like a trap for me. I started to get a lot of subscribers on Substack quite unexpectedly, and I just felt the pressure of that. Where to next? Do I have to optimize this? I'm still in a position where I need to figure out my next step career-wise, and I don't want to fall into that trap, and I want to help others not fall into that trap. And so that particular phrase came out of that sentiment.
I think it's a great phrase, because I think everywhere we look, we're faced with this word. It pops up in everything. Even when we talk about food, an area that is more within our wheelhouse as organic vanilla growers in Queensland, optimization touches, it's not just in industrial policy or automobile manufacturing. It's in everything, and it's now seeped into time management and relationships, and even in terms of how we engage with our family, our children. And I think you're absolutely right onto something, that many people find it bewildering.
Mm.
And it seems like it's a theme that it touches on this idea of resiliency, because in some sense, if you talk to one of these very sort of high-profile personal brands out there, to use your phrase, they would probably tell you, yes, optimization it's more money, it's more access, relationships, enhancing your network. In a sense, they would probably argue that it's 100% aligned with resiliency. But my sense in reading your Substack is that in effect, too much optimization might lead to fragility in a way, right? And it's in fact, it might be something opposing, it might be working against the type of resiliency that you're talking about and advocating for.
Absolutely. And yeah, just thinking about the name of my Substack, Holding Both, that points to the necessity of nuance and paradox, and being able to hold truth from one paradigm and hold truth from another at the same time. And so optimization in and of itself is not a bad thing. It can be done in a way that's in integrity, that has congruence, that is personally, for some who, like you mentioned, food, moving into a kind of an organic diet might be a really valuable thing for someone who's not done that yet. It's when it becomes about this kind of hyper individualization, and self-optimization in service of the self and not the community, is where I feel it becomes problematic. And I think this resilience is in community. But resilience itself is a problematic word too, which is why I talk a lot about flexibility. Resilience can kind of call to mind this holding strong in the face of challenge, maybe not revealing vulnerability. But I think flexibility, particularly psychological flexibility, it's more helpful. It's fluid. It's like flowing into the cracks like a river. It's not toughness. It's coherence. It's not the destination. It's like a practice.
Totally. I really, really like that. And, I guess I started off with a big one, and we jumped right out into the sort of macro stuff with that one quotation. But maybe we can just venture back into your collapse awareness journey. Was there a moment? Was there an encounter, a relationship, some point in time where you flipped from collapse unaware to collapse aware?
Not exactly for me. I feel this has been a thread running through my whole life. I can really trace it all the way back to childhood. There was definitely a moment where I chose to focus on the environment as my kind of career focus at a certain point in time, and that was relatively early on when I was still at university and I was studying political science. And in my final year of that degree, I was also studying law at the time, which killed me. I could not play that game. But the political science degree I loved. I just absolutely flourished in that space. But by my final year, all I could think about was the earth. And at that time, there was a fracturing kind of moment, which was in the form of a breakup for me. That was quite a significant relationship at the time. And in the midst of all the grief and the love that no longer had anywhere to go, I just gave it all to the earth. I was like, that's the only place that I can safely give my love and my devotion. So I started writing quite scathing critiques in my university courses about how the system was feeding this planetary decline, this collapse, and started even at that point projecting, what was going to happen if we continued on this path. And I was invited back to do honours, but at that point I said, no, I want to go and be in the world for a while. So I went to Melbourne for like a gap summer, it was supposed to be at the time, and got a job at the Wilderness Society as a fundraiser. And then I was just steeped in it, absolutely immersed every single day. All we talked about were the facts and figures of climate change and ecological degradation. And at the Wilderness Society, I met the best people I'd ever met in my life and felt at home, really, for the first time in my life. I felt purpose. I was so happy and so alive in that time of my life. And I rose the ranks quite quickly in this fundraising team, and I became a team leader. And then my entire job became about holding the mental wellness of my team because of the content that we were communicating every single day. Speaking to people, literally just standing on the streets, stopping random people and talking to them about the state of the world and asking them to contribute financially to the Wilderness Society. And that's what we did for 6 to 8 hours a day. And it was really, really confronting. And so that was my job, was to hold my team and to take multiple calls a day where my team members would be falling apart and saying, I can't do this anymore. This is so challenging. And so I became quite good at coaching them out of that space and into a space of empowerment in the space of that conversation. And I would also design little workshops that I would run in our team meetings. And we're talking like this was like 15 years ago now. So I'd design these little workshops around this kind of, I guess, emotional, psychological resilience when dealing with these really big picture issues. But like all good things, it did eventually lead to burnout. I had quite porous boundaries with my team. They were like my family as well. I would be taking phone calls like well into the evening, nighttime. I was on all the time. And I loved it. And I just absolutely burnt out. And so I had to take a step back and go on my own kind of healing journey, which has ultimately, on a very long meandering path, led me to where I am now with this Substack, and also the PhD that I'm just finishing up, which is on psychological flexibility in the face of global collapse.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And tell us a little bit about that, when you talk about carrying some of that load with the team, how did you manage that? How did you sort of get, because it seems like it would be a lot of emotional, it's the variance in the emotional sort of dynamics, where you're having these highs and you've brought somebody in and you've almost sort of evangelized something to someone, it's connected. And then on the other side, someone might, we've all done it. We've all walked past, people, or, you sort of see them down in this thing and you walk around this way. And, but the funny thing is that, I've done sales working in a kiosk before. Sometimes it hurts. A snide comment or a look or a vibe, can hurt and can affect you. So how did you manage that for yourself and with your team?
Oh, honestly, I don't know that I did. It was all that I thought about and at the time, but I can't take myself all the way back there and remember exactly what I did in the moment. But you're right, it does hurt. Especially when it's something you're deeply, deeply passionate about. And a lot of these organizations, I think maybe even the Wilderness Society now, outsource to like marketing companies or fundraising companies now to do that. But at the time, the Wilderness Society was in-house. So we were really a part of the organization, and we were all there because we deeply, deeply cared. And we weren't just professional fundraisers, we were actually part of the campaigns. We were going to the places that we were campaigning about. We were connecting with the people on the ground. We were connecting with Indigenous communities that had interest in these spaces that the Wilderness Society was working to protect. So it was really, really painful dealing with the snide comments and the rejection and the avoidance. And these days, I do it like I give those fundraising tables clear berth because I'm just not in a position to support, and so I don't want to get into the conversations and be like, have to tell them no, and I think that's the case for most people. But let me think back to your question. So I think I just had so much love. It was just, I think I just gave my team all the love I had to give, and I just deeply loved these people, and it was about allowing the feelings and giving them space and really validating what they felt, and just becoming like a vessel for the message, trying not to take things personally, taking oneself out of it and just being there as a vessel for the message. But I think that in itself was one of the things that tripped me up, because I did used to see my practice as a kind of an erasure of the self, and that I was just this kind of portal. And I really entered my adulthood, my kind of career, from a place of I truly do not know what I want to do with my life. I had no clear passions. And when I became aware of what was happening in the world, I was like, okay, I just have to devote myself to something. And in doing that, I did erase myself. And so I think my healing journey, that I call it now, was about really inviting myself back in through this body and making my body a safe place to be, so that I could now share that message from an embodied place where I'm really fully here. This is a solid, structure that is cared for, and that message arises from within, as opposed to kind of coming down and through some kind of pipe, I think I used to see myself as, and now it's much more like I'm a tree and I'm bringing up the message from below, from within, and bringing it out through a much stronger foundation.
And it resonates very well. I mean, we've just met, and I feel it. I really feel it. I felt it in your writing, and then to sort of sit across again through this digital interface, but I definitely feel it. So tell us a little bit about the PhD. You're wrapping it up. It's a sort of interdisciplinary, intersectional type of, seems like, I mean, there's a number of different disciplines that are kind of combinatorially coming together in that. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about, what the degree is about, and then the sort of presumably some research interest that you have, going forward.
Absolutely. So it wasn't interdisciplinary by design. That was just by virtue of being something that I created. I began with political science back when I did my first degree, not straight out of school. I did have a gap year or two first, but that initial time at university, I returned to university about a decade later and retrained in psychology. So the PhD is through the School of Psychological Sciences at my university, the University of Tasmania. So it's supposed to be a psychology PhD. But I cannot help but be utterly systematic in the way, and systemic or systematic in the way that I think, and absolutely had to bring in politics and economics when thinking about how do we bring this kind of collapse awareness into the field of psychology. And I came up with this term post-growth psychology, which I'm not totally adhering myself to at the moment, but that's an economic term, post-growth. And so, yeah, there's this economic side, there's a political side. And I just really wanted to encourage practitioners to really consider, and I think most practitioners on a personal level do really consider the systemic factors behind their clients' distress, but really pushing the field forward to a place where in some ways psychology becomes irrelevant, because mental wellness is so a product of the global economic system that we're in, right? But practitioners still have a place. And so I was thinking, how can I equip them most basically, like most simply? What are some therapeutic tools we could develop that would help when someone is a mental health practitioner is sitting in a room with someone who says, I cannot go on because of the state of the environment, or I'm having suicidal thoughts because of the state of the environment. And these are real things that people are expressing in therapy, and most practitioners are just kind of winging it. And so I just wanted to help contribute to setting up a framework, something that could be referred to and utilized. And to simplify my research, I decided to go with what was already my favorite therapeutic approach, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. That was a therapy that I went through myself when I was on my, again, healing journey. And it just goes so well with this kind of eco-anxiety feeling that people have, because it doesn't say that you need to change your thoughts. It doesn't say that there's anything wrong with you. It's very non-pathological, non-pathologizing. And ultimately, we do have to accept what is happening, and we do have to commit to something to give our lives meaning and move forward. And so I just saw an overlap there, which other people have seen too, but I just wanted to formalize it through research. And so that's what I've been doing, and hopefully will be completing very soon.
Yeah, again, thank you for sharing. I'm married to a political scientist, so we met in graduate school, doing slightly different degrees, but I know that the sort of the rigors of the academy are, sometimes it's hard sometimes for people to understand, where stress and where pressures come from, but it's a unique place to make a living, so kudos to you for going and getting the degree and adding your very unique contribution to the literature.
Thank you.
There's a fellow Substacker, Honest Sorcerer. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff, but we did a long session that we're going to release pretty soon with him. And I, just looking back on it, I think I failed to actually define what the polycrisis is. It is good to actually define some of these terms, and to actually ask the question. So, Gabrielle, maybe can you tell us in your own words, what is this crisis? How do you see it? What is it that we have coming down the pike?
This is a great question, and one that I've not tried to answer previously. I feel like someone like Nate Hagens would give a really amazing answer to this question, because I have been focusing more on the psychology of it as opposed to the kind of political, economic, everything that's happening. But I will do my best to put it in my own words. So, yeah, there's this term polycrisis. People also call it meta-crisis, and it refers to a converging of crises, which would broadly be that all kind of feed into each other and precipitate each other. So it's political, it's economic, it's environmental, and then you could even go deeper and say it's psychological and it's spiritual. I'm not sure if I've missed any there, but we're living in a time where we're so divorced from our human essence, from who would the species that we are, and we can trace that back, thousands and thousands of years. Some people say it started with agriculture. Some people say it started with just becoming conscious, but that has led to what's happened in the last 100 years since the world wars, where capitalism became, global capitalism became the kind of the world order. And there were some pretty big, real moves. It didn't just emerge. There was some big restructuring that happened world over to really set those wheels in motion. And it began out of World War II in this effort to rebuild. So the IMF was created, the World Bank was created, and this kind of whole system of loaning money to countries, structural adjustment programs, they called them at the time, and the loans were given on the condition that the countries decentralized all of their government services, privatized them, and then made profit off of them. And so all of these countries were forced to privatize transport, healthcare, really just this ultimate anti-socialism steps. And these were the conditions of the loan, and they were to pay back the loan with the profits made from these privatized enterprises. and I guess ultimately the GDP of the country. And this led to more and more dependence on natural resources, carbon from the earth being used, fossil fuels, and this was all combined with technological innovation, and we just became fixated with this endless growth kind of mentality, despite the fact that we live on a limited, finite planet, and it's just simply not possible. And so this whole growth at all costs economic model, which is ultimately a political stance, is driving the desecration of the planet, and then divorcing people from their natural selves, the true nature of what it means to be a human being. And then there's so many other social, cultural, religious, spiritual factors, but all of these are converging to what we're now calling the polycrisis or meta-crisis, where it's just all going to come crumbling down. There's just simply no two ways about it. There's not going to be, someone coming along to save us with some technological solution. There may well be a life on the other side of what we're calling the inevitable collapse, but we just don't know what that's going to look like now. We don't know how many people we're going to lose in this process, how violent it will become. Yeah, we just don't know what's coming.
This would be a good moment to invoke Dr. Jem Bendell, who you quote in one of your pieces. Collapse is a process, not an event. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. We are in collapse right now. It's already happening.
The question is, how do we respond as different levels of analysis, right? As a planet, as national governments, as regions, as cities, and ultimately as institutions and families and individuals. And isn't that the question? How do we respond? We don't have. There's as many different approaches as there are. Certainly as there are countries on Earth.
Absolutely, that's the question. And we are all ultimately individuals, and I don't know how many individuals that are out there who have the kind of influence that could change governmental, like country level or national, global level decision making. But for most of us, all we have are ourselves, our families, our communities, and that's where we begin. And I think for me, what it's become about is embodying what I call the new world or the new earth, without trying to sound too kind of new agey now, but not from a place of I'm going to be the perfect like post-growth or like collapse aware person. I'm not kind of or the perfect like climate activist. I'm not going to get everything right, but I am going to think about what sort of world are we wanting to see, and I'm going to make as many decisions throughout the day that I can to start to seed that world now. Like, planting a tree is the perfect analogy. Planting as many of those trees, putting as many of those seeds in the ground as I can that I may never see the result of, but I see particularly our generation as being this kind of bridging generation where maybe our kids, maybe our grandkids will start to see the results of these different ways of being that we're seeding now. But yeah, someone's got to do it. And so I think it's many people who can kind of wake up to that and make that commitment for themselves. And a big part of acceptance and commitment therapy is getting in touch with your own values, getting in touch with what is really your what really drives you. Because I think what can happen in like activist circles is that we start doing what we think we should do, and we overcommit, and we show up to every rally, and we try to make perfect purchasing decisions, or we change our diet in a way that we think is more ethical. And none of these little tiny micro decisions are really going to make a difference on a global scale. So I think the best thing one can do is find what is the thing that really drives you. And it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be grand, but focusing on your contribution is, I guess, the thing that in some ways like lets you off the hook of all the other kind of perfect decisions that you wish you could make that you can't. And again, this is what holding both is about. We've got to have one foot in the old world and one in the new. And so we're still going to be driving cars and maybe buying things that have been imported from other countries some weeks, because that's what's easy and convenient, and we have children to feed or whatever it might be. But yeah, I think if we can kind of connect to our personal purpose and devote ourselves to that, then that's enough.
One thing that as someone who is relatively new to a lot of the collapse aware literature, who I'm just in real time beginner greenhorn level getting exposed, digesting and trying to process a lot of this information and trying to make sense of it in some like big tent framework. One thing I think that, I presume you would acknowledge is that there isn't much consensus, even within the collapse aware world. I mean, a sort of casual meander in Substack, you'll find a lot of voices that definitely connect and intersect. There's a lot of overlap in Venn diagram, but if you take this the view as to how it's going to play out, how the collapse will play out. I think I laugh, but it's a nervous laughter. It ranges from, just absolute sheer doom to more sort of, the renewable space, let's keep an eye on it. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Who knows? We might have a breakthrough technology that comes through. Capital, may efficiently find its way to some of these, outsize projects where we could have some, exponential gain or something like that. And then, of course, a lot of different viewpoints in between. What I really like about holding both is that I think you make as it's almost like your leading foot is this idea that there is contradiction, that there's no way to just take a pitchfork and go to the World Bank and it's got to be some form of cooperation, some form of collaboration, some form of community level interaction that this is going to require. So I don't really have a point with this statement. All I'm saying is that I really like this metaphor of holding both.
Yeah, thank you. There's a thinker I came across recently, Michael Dowd, who came up with the term post-doom. And I really like that. And more than anything, I try to be, I wanted to say hopeful, but I also kind of think of it as like post-hope as well. I try to be, all the words are like catching in my mouth. I don't want to say optimistic either, because it's not about optimism. I want to be a beacon, I guess. I try to be a beacon of like, for me, we may well be living in the end times. I personally don't quite think that's it. I don't think we are. I think there is going to be, I'd like to think that there will be life beyond this time. that will completely reorient the way that we live on the planet and bring back some kind of life in abundance and live in a more harmonious way. But ultimately for me, it's about being here now. You know, we are on this beautiful planet. It's the most beautiful place in the universe as far as I'm concerned, and we're so lucky to be here, and life is still so beautiful even as all of this suffering is happening around us. And for many people across the world, I'm sure that it doesn't feel beautiful in this moment, and I feel so much grief on behalf of those people. But for those of us who can access that, we should absolutely feel joy. We should revel in the beauty of this world. And that kind of ties to, my decision to have children, which was the piece that seeded my Substack, how I chose to have children despite knowing the world was in crisis. And that's what it was about. That's what it came down to. I was like, even if they're the last generation, I want them here with me, experiencing these moments of absolute reverence and joy and beauty. And even if I lost them in the most tragic circumstances, I would have still had them for a moment. I would have still had this life. And we just cannot predict what's going to happen. And I can only make the decisions that are right for me in this moment. And we might make some of those decisions with some forbearance, for example, like the number of children we choose to have. But I think if it's driven by love, if it's something you just absolutely cannot say no to in your heart, like that's the right choice for some people. And that's really where I come from. Like, let's just love it all while we can.
Well, I love this perspective. It really is. It's great to hear it, and I guess I come from a sort of big tent view. I grew up with contradictions culturally, in terms of background, in terms of religion, and we had 3 religions in my household. So I think there's obviously some contradictions in that platform, right? And what I love about it is that you're honest about it. That there fundamentally are contradictions. Like there's multiple crises. There's famine. There is war in multiple places happening as we're hosting this teleconference. And yet, does that mean that we're forced to see everything in a zero-sum way? I don't know. I don't know if I would agree with that, and I think there's something really invigorating about your sort of platform, that as long as it's honest, right? And I think that the root of love is honesty, right? As long as you're honest about it, that there's something transformative about that in terms of managing those contradictions.
Yeah, they really proliferate when you start to look for them. The contradictions keep finding them and keep finding more and more things to write about.
Exactly. Endless, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're just absolutely endless, and that's I think to do anything in this collapse aware space, I think one of the first things you have to do is you have to confront some of these fundamental contradictions.
Yeah, and I think it's been so liberating for me because I did spend so much of my early adulthood trying to find the perfect path. And I kept kind of becoming disillusioned everywhere I was. And I thought, no matter what I choose, I'm going to become disillusioned. And then I just really embraced the disillusionment and then just found joy on the other side of it. And I was like, great, this is what it's all about.
But that's it. But I think you're really scratching at something that a lot of people have attempted, but can't quite crack. They're too sensitive to social judgment. There's a level of fear of the unknown. There's a level of trepidation that comes with that. But I think that when you talk about that embrace, I mean, really kudos to you. And I think that's why people are resonating with your Substack is that a lot of people are attempting this. They can see what you're doing with that and they want to learn more.
Mm. Thank you.
So does faith come? I mean, I normally wouldn't ask this question, but your language is peppered with phraseology that is somewhat spiritual imbued. So I think it's a fair question to ask. Does faith, how does that drive you? How does that impact your thinking, your worldview?
Mm. Oh, I love this question again because I've never been asked it before. And so I'm really curious myself to see what arises. Faith is not the right word for me. I feel faith is kind of putting it to someone else. Still, if you think about kind of a traditional God in a Christian sense, like God, I have faith in God and God will save us or do something for us. And I have no idea what kind of narratives are going on in kind of those communities about collapse, if anything. But I have been exposed to a lot of New Age spirituality, and so that has kind of seeped in. It was peppered, to use your word, through my upbringing, not in any kind of like overly heavy way, but the communities that my family moved in were those really kind of 90s New Age communities where there was a lot of repackaged kind of Eastern spirituality. And then, of course, in my 20s, I really went into that journey myself, and I've done a lot of yoga and meditation. I've studied under a few sort of Eastern lineages, and some more problematic ones as well. And then I moved away from that because of the kind of more problematic aspects of that kind of Western repackaging of Eastern spirituality and all the things that come with that. But I have also dabbled with a lot of psychedelics. So that's been a big part of my journey. So kind of everything from LSD and mushrooms to ayahuasca in the Amazon. And through those experiences and smoking DMT as well, which is like, basically a 5-hour ayahuasca journey in 5 minutes. I have touched something on the other side. I have absolutely felt something to me that felt something like God. But it was not outside of myself, it was in myself. It was like the more the deeper and deeper I go in, the more and more I collapse into myself, the closer I get to that essence of, I guess, oneness. And then it kind of bursts back out, and then you're just everything again. So I guess I see this world as everything is spirit, everything is God. We're all connected to this universal consciousness. And so there is some trust there, I suppose, that I do sometimes frame it as more of, I don't want to trivialize it and call it like a game or something that I'm because it is absolutely meaning here in this journey that we're on as a civilization, as a species. But I'm also not, it helps me be less attached, I think, than say like a young climate activist who might just be feeling so much grief and confusion and devastation about what's happening to the world. And I was once that young person, you know, and then through these experiences, I've become a lot more at peace with what's happening and with whatever happens, because I know that ultimately everything is kind of what I've touched and experienced when I've been beyond and on the other side. And I think for me, psychedelics is actually going to they're going to play a really important role in the next few decades. And there's no mistake that they're becoming more and more mainstream and legalized now, because many people do have that experience through psychedelics of really touching something beyond themselves. And I was given my mission through ayahuasca. I was shown this path. I was shown that piece I wrote, that map of collapse, 100 years was what I saw on an ayahuasca journey.
That was through an ayahuasca journey.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
And that was 10 years ago, the ayahuasca journey. So that was back in 2014. So it's a memory of it. But you know, that people say it takes decades to integrate ayahuasca, and that's certainly been the case for me. It's taken many, many years. And it's almost with me still every day, but it's like every day I'll kind of have a memory of something that I've seen on one of those journeys, and I kind of come back to that. And I don't engage with psychedelics at the moment because I've got a young family and it's not a space I can enter. But I have my memories of being in those spaces, and so I can kind of take myself back there in meditation or even in kind of dance or movement. I can access that space and kind of let images and messages arise from within myself, and that's what guides a lot of my writing, how I think about what I want to write next or do next. And, yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's so many threads to pick up on there, but one thing that's just burning that I have to ask is, in that framework, how do you make sense of how humanity led itself to such a precarious position? How did we get here? If there is this oneness, how could the oneness have enabled or allowed this many people to be fooled into this El Dorado that we've been chasing for the last 200 years of industrial civilization, to the point that we're at the precipice, potentially looking at, you know, some precipitous drop, you know, where collapse is a process, but it's not going to be like this. It's going to be like this. Mm-hmm. How did the consciousness allow us to get to this point?
Good question. I think, you know, it begins with the forgetting. So we've forgotten, obviously. That's part of being human. If we think about, you know, we come to this earth to live this life. If we had that oneness, that consciousness from the start, I don't know, it would be a very strange life. It would be a weird one to live. And yet, I don't know, is that what we're working towards? Is that what we're wanting, to have kind of everybody wake up, as it were, and live this sort of, live like they're in a festival and just prance around and enjoy the abundance of life? Like, I'm not quite sure, but I do see it as, you know, if we're the universe experiencing itself, it wants to try everything. You know, it wants to kind of touch all aspects of light and dark and feel what it's like to be some psychomaniac trillionaire and feel what it's like to be the complete opposite of that and everything in between. I don't know. I feel like it's an experiment, perhaps, that has maybe gone really wrong. And sometimes I do see it like that it's an experiment that's gone really wrong and everything's just kind of running away with itself. And we are at that kind of cliff edge going, are we going to bring ourselves back? Or are we just going to go over and then hope that a few of us survive and see something new? But and it's how I reconcile with being alive at this time as well. I try to tell myself and people around me, if they ever ask, that this is kind of a really exciting time to be alive. What an interesting process to witness, and to even just to try be part of making it better, even if we fail. Isn't that kind of a fun journey to go on? Like, let's just see what happens. But to answer your question, I don't know. I think a lot of people have tried to answer this better than myself. I think a book that comes to mind is Ishmael by David Abram. I haven't read it for a really long time, but I feel like he kind of attempts to answer that question.
And then another thread to pick up on is the connection between psychedelics and the digital oneness that certain, tech bros, to use that phrase, right? People like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk have talked about this in different guises. This idea that, well, we'll have a universal income. If you're a 18-year-old male, whatever, we're only going to need 5% of the workforce to really do the work. AI will take care of it. Our job as a society is to figure out how to occupy you through this sort of kind of pesky natural existence that we have to manage. So we'll give you games and some type of simulation in the digital realm to basically just manage this pesky biological aspect. I guess my question is, do psychedelics, could they be used for nefarious purposes?
Yeah, and this is where holding both is really important again, right? Because I absolutely see a place for some of those things, but ultimately that world you just described to me sounds really horrifying. It's like the internet, there's absolutely uses for it, but it's also just at the root of so much of our current suffering, this utter dopamine addiction that we're all in the grips of now, this being perpetually online, always available, always connected to everyone, everywhere, at all times. And on a personal level, the only thing that makes me feel any sense of humanity, genuine wellness, is to be completely disconnected, to be offline, to be in my body, to be out in the world, and to be doing meaningful work. So I don't like the kind of tech bro vision of this alternate reality, and I see that it could absolutely be one path. And I guess that's where we have to be really careful as well with psychedelics, because it leads to illusions of grandeur, and it leads to psychosis, can lead to psychosis. And who are we to say we're the ones that aren't in the psychosis? Like, it's a really, really tricky line to walk. And this is where I just throw my hands up and I just go, that's just I just don't have an answer. And this is what I'm grappling with all the time, and what comes through my writing. And every day can kind of be a bit of an emotional roller coaster.
Forgive me if I'm like sort of like an accountant just picking on these little contradictions. I'm not intending to do that. I see myself as very much a fellow traveler with you in this like contradictory world. I mean, my own handle on what was then Twitter used to be bothness. I wrote a book on managing, like, my heritage is Chinese and American. So I wrote a book on just the cultural balance and cultural interplay. So, it's when I just listening to the title of your Substack already piqued my interest, because it just gets into this. So I'm not trying to nitpick and do that. I'm just sort of basking with you kind of in this idea that, yeah, there are some really difficult contradictions that, probably the best answer is to just throw up your hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do. One thing that we're trying to do, we have on our organic vanilla plantation, next year we're going to be launching a series of sort of weekend retreats. And the idea is to invite some families, could be individuals, couples, to come, and the vision is to make meals from scratch together with ingredients that come from the farm or that we forage in the wild. Get everyone involved. We're going to hand make some food. We're going to ask questions. We're going to design the menu. We're going to put it all together, and we're going to have a big feast and share some stories around a campfire. And that's our weekend. And that is my simple sort of way, I think, it's my little microcosm for dealing with collapse, I guess you could say. It's our response is this tiny, tiny little nano thing that you can do, right? And I think this picks up on some of the things that you're really just talking about so, almost poetically, about like letting go of like that 20-year-old self where you're like, oh my God, the climate doom. Like, I mean, the ICCPC said this statistic. Do you not know? Like that sort of, it's like Greta Thunberg 20 years from now is going to look back and say, well, I can see that Greta Thunberg, but 20 years from now, she'll be,
She's going to be on some farm somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. She'll be.
Yeah, well, if we make it that far, but it'll be like, yeah, I'm more at peace. I did this and so on. I think she would probably resonate with, she'll look back on your Substack and say, yeah, okay, that's interesting, because when you look at it from the macro picture, there's so many things to be terrified about, to be just absolutely like emotionally thrown asunder by. But when we look at it in this tiny little microcosm, there's something empowering about that. Like I could do this one little thing. If I could get a few families together, and we're going to hand make some food, and we're going to talk about how the food's made, and we're going to talk about animal welfare, because we had to harvest this thing and it died, and we're going to consume it. It's going to give us energy, and somehow we're going to compost it, and there's a cycle here. But we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get kids involved. So that's a little bit about where we're coming from. And I think if it gives you a little, sort of pep in your step, it's that, yeah, we love to read your stuff, because it's we draw inspiration from it.
Thank you so much. That's really beautiful, and I love to hear what you're doing and to hear it reflected back to me. Yeah, what you feel like my words are kind of saying, and what you've described is exactly it. It's being here now and in this moment, and how incredible do those little kind of micro choices feel when we do them in the moment. Like, it's something as simple as I made Play-Doh from scratch last week, and it took literally 5 minutes, and I just felt like I was like I'm the ultimate earth goddess. I finally made Play-Doh from scratch. the other thing that kind of came to mind there is that I feel like I'm trying to convey or help people with through my writing is to be a little bit prepared too for when those kind of systems start to break down. So that's not so shocking and you are a bit ready. And there are multiple threads. There's like the practical resilience. So maybe having like shelf-stable pantry, for example, and like a few months worth of food supplies and a veggie garden, and and then there's going to be the emotional, relational sides. Like, what are the relationships that you've established? How are you in relationships? Like these things are important. Like, we have been so disconnected from each other, and we've forgotten how to be together. And we're also getting more and more sophisticated too in our self-awareness and emotional awareness. So I'm thinking of things like attachment theory, say, or this idea of nervous system literacy. These little things that we can equip ourselves with are going to help us if and when our foundations really start to crack beneath us. So we can keep taking those little micro actions, but we also want to be a little bit prepared for not being so reliant on those systems, those institutions, that really complex ones that interweave behind the scenes that we don't even see. Just think how easy it was in COVID that for the supermarkets to suddenly like be emptied. It's that kind of thing, and that it could happen again tomorrow. And so we just want to be a little bit prepared.
It is going to happen again. It's to me, it's more a matter of frequency and the number of days it takes to replenish stocks. And again, we can have a sort of more doomier, gloomier, discussion talking about this or different things, but I think we sufficiently talked about, you defined the terms and you did it really well. But I think the real work for us, it centers more on the areas in which we can have a meaningful impact. That may just be with our own emotional regulation, right? I think that this is a thread that you've talked about in a lot of your writing, with I think it's the middle way toolkit that you talk about, which, there is a practical side to this, right? And when you talk about relationships, I think men are probably more apt to look at relationships as this kind of more nebulous thing, but really, I think they're very practical. I think we had a conversation with, again, another fellow Substacker, Resilient Tomorrow, and we were talking about the real world value of certain tools in the moment of collapse. A lot of Americans, for example, they have their AR-15, they have their rifle, and sort of like, anything goes down, I got ammo, I'm good, but you can be disarmed, you can be robbed, your weapon can be turned against you. You have to sleep. At some point you'll have to trust people. At some point you will run out of something. And in my view, the tools are the actual physical material is secondary and tertiary. At the end of the day, it's the relationship, it's the credibility you have, it's the trust that you can manage between other people. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Oh, totally. And it's not just from a perspective of personal survival, like equip yourself with these tools so that you can survive, because anything can happen and you might not. It's also about, again, like being part of that bridging generation, evolving humanity. These are just things that we need to learn to be better, to be a better people, to, I guess, self-actualize as a species. And yeah, so even even if they don't lead to your personal survival, perhaps they'll contribute to our collective survival in some way.
And the emotional regulation, that's another one of your themes, right? Because in any scenario, whether it's so, not good or terrible, the emotional regulation is going to be a critical component. Someone who is physically strong and has got all of the right tools and all of the right training and they know all of this, but they're an emotional wreck and they don't know how to work with other people. They can't sort of delegate or compromise. How much use in any scenario is that type of person going to be?
Exactly. And that really kind of angry person with a rifle on their shoulder, they're probably going to be the first to get shot. But really interestingly, on one of my ayahuasca journeys, this is a message direct from the medicine herself to humanity. What is the most important thing we need to cultivate? That was my question for her, and the answer I got was emotional regulation. So yeah, and at the time I was like, what? Like, this was like 10 years ago, and I was like, what? No. But it's become increasingly apparent and obvious that that's it. And it's almost the root of the problem, like that question you had earlier about how do we get here. It's like we're all just perpetually dysregulated, and whenever we make a decision from that dysregulated place, it's usually the wrong decision.
So does that again, this is probably more language this is more post-capitalist industrial language, but does that create some type of responsibility in us in terms of reducing some of our dependencies, in terms of, whether that's some chemical dependency? You talk about the dopamine. When we look at that and if we somehow sign up and we say we're collapse aware, does that mean that that others in the community would look back and say, oh yeah, well, you need to stop, don't play as many video games because it's like that rat eating the cheese and it's just going boom, boom, boom. We need to stop consuming cigarettes, not because it's unhealthy, but because we are furthering dependencies.
100%. It's so important. And this is why personal work is such a huge part of this process. There's kind of that, I don't know who said it first, but this phrase, heal yourself to heal the world. And it can kind of seem vague at first, but when you point to some of those specifics, like how valuable are you going to be if you're addicted to video games? It's obvious. Or to any kind of substance. I absolutely think becoming collapse prepared, collapse literate would include reducing your dependencies 100%. And maybe using medicine more mindfully or carefully too. Like some people are finding microdosing mushrooms, for example, is like a really positive path of healing. Maybe instead of in place of something like SSRIs, not medical advice, but there are some more natural medicines that have been given to us by the earth that can have a role to play as well. But yeah, if we're using, all addictions are a dysregulation issue, and so being able to emotionally regulate, or even like not being able to emotionally regulate. I suck at emotional regulation, if I'm honest, but I'm aware of it. I can be in my pain body, I can be in my suffering, and I can name it and not turn to a substance to fix it. And I can do damage sometimes. I can snap. That's one of my kids. I can have a fight with my husband. I can, but we have language around it. It's, Mummy's overstimulated today. I need some space. And I'm really, really sensitive. So that's been a big part of my journey. And I don't know how much it shines through my writing or how much it will become a part of my bigger story, if ever, as I write more and share more on these platforms. But I've been a really kind of messy person. I've had big emotional highs and lows, and have made impulsive decisions from those places, and I have felt deep shame about that, and I have compared myself to my family, who are maybe a bit more I don't know, conventional, steady. My siblings took a more conventional path, for example, but that it was that pain and those big highs and those big lows that led me on this journey and just had me just eyes wide open to the world. You know, there's nothing now that I feel like I haven't confronted, and I feel in a really, really good place moving into the next phase of my life to I guess share what I've learned and maybe even embody some authority on the matter, because I've really been there. I've been in the mess, and I've managed my way out of it without, I guess, going down. I'm just being careful with what I say, because I don't want to invalidate anyone who's taken like a pharmaceutical path or something like that, if that's been right for them. But there's been so many times I've been offered, for example, antidepressants, and I've not ultimately taken them because I didn't want to start down that path. And so it's meant I've been raw dogging reality, as the Gen Zs put it, this whole time, and it's been painful at times, and I've wanted to numb it, but it's been the path, it's been the medicine to do that.
Well, that's resiliency right there. Right. It's I think choosing the appropriate tool set for the environment. And I think we could look at that from a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different domains, you know? I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we called ourselves Vanilla Club. It's that it's sort of like, yeah, you can make up hundreds of different flavors. You can do this and you can do that and everything, but a lot of them depend on imports. They depend on all of these other inputs and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with the original sometimes.
I wondered where the name came from. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like, you know, we like to construct these very complicated identities for ourselves, which is fine. And but it goes back to your point. We're all individuals anyways. I think that the natural world already knows that it already knows that we're unique individuals, right? But sometimes we take it a little bit too far, maybe, and a lot of this is supplied by this system that probably profits off of some of those dependencies. If ever you're in Queensland, I mean, it would be a real pleasure to have you come visit and attend one of the retreats. We're going to follow the Substack with so much interest. I'm going to finally make my first post, and we really will see you there. So
awesome. I'll look out for it. Thanks, right. Jason.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Take care, okay?
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.